Hey there, my name's Adam. You've probably seen me in a few of our other educational videos leading up to this. And if you have made it this far in the series, it's your lucky day because this is actually a pretty short one, easy to explain. We're going to be going over milk steaming. Can't tell. Now, to start things out, the first thing I want to talk about is the size of your steaming pitcher based on your beverage size, right? These pitchers are designed to hold specific volumes of milk. This little baby guy would be, more for like a 8 ounce beverage, like 5 to 8 ounce beverage. This guy, this is much more like a 10 to 12 ounce beverage. And then they make them even bigger than that, where this guy would be, if your cafe offers beverages of grande size, 16, 18, 20 ounces. But we're going to keep it pretty traditional. We're going to go ahead and practice with the 10 to 12 ounce milk pitcher. Now, one thing about these is when they're sold online, they're usually sold. This would be like a 20 or a 22 ounce milk pitcher. That's total volume of the pitcher. But you basically want to cut that in half because that's really how much liquid we're going to be putting into it. Or, yeah, so ending up with, I should say, with foam and liquid. Okay, now getting into the meat of the subject, really, steaming milk is exceptionally easy if it's explained well. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do for you guys. Give you some very simple, very basic physical metrics to follow of wand placement and the procedure to start and stop the process and what you're looking for. And that should make it very easy. All right. So we're going to get into the basics of milk steaming. Generally speaking, the first thing we want to talk about is what are we trying to do with milk steaming? And that's actually very simple. We're just trying to do two things, right? We're trying to incorporate air or not, depending on if you're trying to make a flat white or no foam latte. But we're adding air and then we're mixing the air. We're trying to mix that air as completely as possible throughout the entirety of the milk so that we come up with a nice, tight microfoam. Remember, we are looking for a final milk consistency that looks somewhat akin to like wet latex paint. There should be no discernible bubbles, right? And you should be able to swirl it around and have it look glossy and nice. All right. The other aspect of milk steaming is temperature, right? Because we're using steam, that hot steam transfers its temperature to the liquid, increases its temperature. Typically speaking, we want we want a final beverage temperature of right around 145 degrees Fahrenheit. That's typically what we're looking for in specialty coffee. Want to get it just over 140 typically, but you know, once you hit 145, 150, the higher you keep going beyond that, the heat actually starts breaking down proteins and denaturing sugars, and the milk becomes less and less sweet the hotter we go. So really, we're just trying to get it up to about 145. Call that good. Also, do be cognizant of if it's a beverage for a child, like a baby chino or something like that. We're going to treat it as child's temperature, right? So think more like 120. We're going to try and keep that nice and low to minimize any risk of a child accidentally burning themselves. One other side note is the type of milk you use can also somewhat dictate temperature. I find that non-dairy milks typically perform much better if they're taken to a little bit lower final temperature. So if you're having issues with steaming your almond milk, your oat milk, anything like that, try not taking it quite as hot as you would full whole milk, right? Maybe take it up to only 135 degrees, and that will help maintain some of the foam structure when you're pouring the beverage. Gotcha. All right, so now we're going to move on to the actual basic metrics of what needs to be done, how much milk we're going to use to start with, and then how we decide how much foam we're going to build and wand placement. Okay, so typically speaking, most milk pitchers have kind of protruded spouts. I typically like to teach people, I call it IPW or International Pinky Width, which is a hilarious thing to call it. But basically, if you look at where the bottom of the spout moves into the body, and then you put your pinky underneath the spout. At the very bottom of your pinky, that's roughly going to be about where we want our milk level in whatever milk steaming pitcher that we're utilizing. Some pitchers have actual physical markings. Some of them have volumetric lines on the inside, which makes it very easy and repeatable. I really like those kinds of milk pitchers, but really, as long as you're getting your milk somewhere in the range of an IPW underneath your milk spout, you're going to be in the ballpark of the right volume to start with to end up with the right volume for that specific beverage size, if that makes sense. Okay, so now that we've talked about that, we want to talk about, remember, we want to keep our milk in the fridge. A couple of reasons: food safety, right? You pull a jug of milk out and you leave it sitting on your counter for the whole shift that you're using it, that milk is warming up every time. I really don't like to see that. Okay, we want to fill our milk immediately back in the fridge. That helps us out in another way too, because we want our starting liquid to be as cold as possible, because that gives us an extended amount of time to add the air that we want, and it gives us a longer period of time that we can mix that air before we get up to our final temperature. So keep your milk in the fridge. Don't ever re-steam previously steamed milk. So no matter what, if you have some leftover milk in your pitcher at the end, after you've combined your beverage and handed it off, we need to dump and rinse this pitcher. And ideally, this pitcher should be going back in the fridge too, if the fridge is directly under your espresso machine. It's not, it's fine to leave this upside down on the pitcher rinse or drip tray, but just make sure we're thoroughly rinsing it after every use, right? Okay, so the next portion that we're going to talk about is steam wand placement. How do we start? Where do we start, right? So we're going to imagine that this pen is your steam wand. We have our pitcher. We have our milk filled up to the IPW. So how we're going to start is we are going to take our milk pitcher and we are going to put the steam wand into the spout of the pitcher. And then we are going to go ahead and slide the pitcher up the steam wand until the tip of the steam wand is submerged below the surface of the liquid. Okay? So we're always going to keep contact with the steam wand and the milk pitcher. That helps create stability and it helps create a consistent starting point. So we're going to keeping the steam wand tip 50% left to right, 50% front to back. You just want it right in the middle right there. Then all you're going to do is you're going to slightly tilt your pitcher to one direction or the other. I like to just tilt it to the right so that the steam wand tip is below the surface in the middle of the cup, but then moves 25% to the right. So we are 50% front to back, and then we are 25% to the right. Still holding the steam wand in that spout. That is the correct starting position for your steaming. Okay. So the actual process will be fill with milk, purge your steam wand tip away from the pitcher, get any trapped moisture out of the steam wand. Then we bring our steam wand over. We bring the steam wand tip 50% front to back, 25% to the right, and make sure that the steam wand tip is submerged under. We don't want to bury the steam wand all the way in the bottom because we lose power and we lose our vortex. We want it just deep enough that the tip disappears, right? That's going to be our starting position. Now what's going to happen is once we start the steam, you're going to slowly slide down the wand just a little bit so that the steam tip comes near the surface and starts pulling in air into, and that's going to incorporate air into the liquid. And that is called building foam. Okay. Now, depending on how much foam you want to build is how vigorously you're going to let the air, or how shallow you're going to have the tip of your steam wand, and then for what period of time you allow that to happen, right? So when you bring your steam wand up towards the surface of the milk, the amount of time that you keep it at that surface level is going to dictate how much foam you build. Once we've built the appropriate amount of foam, we're simply going to slide the tip a little deeper into the liquid, and then it will become a smooth sound. So we'll start in the liquid, turn on the steam wand, and then we will bring the tip a little higher towards the surface, and we'll start hearing kind of like a paper ripping sound. And that's where we're adding air into the liquid. And then once we've built the appropriate amount of foam, you're going to just ever so slightly slide back up the wand a little bit so that the tip goes a little deeper, and then it becomes a smooth sound. So then we are no longer adding air, we are simply mixing, right? Okay, welcome back. Now we're gonna actually go ahead and start doing physical run-throughs of this process. So as I stated before, I have my, and for the purposes of this video, I'm actually using cold water and just a drop of dish soap. It's a very easy way to practice steaming without being wasteful of dairy. Great. So I'm in front of the espresso machine. First thing I'm going to do is make sure that I have the appropriate amount of liquid in my steaming pitcher, and I will place that close by. The next thing I'm going to do is carefully wrap the tip of the steam wand, making sure to get my fingers up high away from the path of the steam. And then I'm simply going to engage and disengage the steam wand a couple of times. Now what that does is that is pushing any condensed moisture out of the steam wand so that now we just have good, hot, dry steam. Okay. Steam wand rag does not go on the drip tray. Now, we are simply bringing the steam wand pretty much, I like to keep it nice and vertical, but I just bring it out as far as it'll go. Ideally, this angle should be somewhere around 35 to 40 degrees. Some steam wands can, some can't go quite as steep, but either way, it's fine. Using my steam wand rag, I'm going to carefully wrap the tip. I'm going to point the tip down and away, keeping my fingers high and out of the path of the steam. I'm going to actuate the steam wand a couple of times to purge. Okay, I have my milk pitcher with my milk inside of it. I keep the steam wand nice and vertical, but I bring the steam wand as far out as it'll go. We are going to put the steam wand into the tip or the pouring spout of the pitcher. We are bringing the steam, or we're putting the tip of the steam wand underneath the surface of the liquid, and we are going to put the steam wand tip 50% front to back, 25% to the right, and then we are going to go ahead and start. I will bring the pitcher down slightly to start adding air, and then I will bring the pitcher back up slightly to stop adding air and to just let it mix. Make sure that you keep the steam wand tip under the surface of the milk until it's completely turned off. If the steam wand is still running and you pull the pitcher down away, this is going to explode all over your face, and you probably are going to at least be messy, if not get a little burn. Okay. Lastly, we want to make sure that the foam is nicely incorporated. So I always teach people, hold the pitcher by the handle. You can use fingers on either side for support. We always want to cover the pitcher with our other hand, because when those bubbles pop, little milk splatters go everywhere. And then we are simply going to swirl the pitcher gently on the counter, keeping it flat and level. Notice I'm using dish soap instead of milk, so it can be a little tricky to get all the bubbles out of the way. But this gives you a very good idea of what's happening. Okay, so this, ideally, we shouldn't be able to see too many discernible bubbles. We want nice, tight microfoam. Should look kind of like wet latex paint. And how viscous this is will depend on how much foam you've built. So I really haven't built a huge layer of foam on this one. This is more like latte milk. The next one I'll do, I will keep adding more air, so we'll get a much higher level of foam. That'll be more for cappuccino milk. So one thing I really want to get across to everybody here is really all the different cafe beverages you're going to be creating, really just utilize about 3 amounts of foam. There's only 3 different amounts of foam that you need to worry about. The vast majority of beverages are just ratios, different ratios, right? A cappuccino, traditionally speaking, would be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, meaning roughly 1.5 ounces to 2 ounces of espresso, roughly 2 ounces of liquid, and then 2 ounces of foam on top.
You mean densely textured milk?
Yeah, so really at the end of the day, I really just try to teach people how to do the 3 basics, right? SCA, or Specialty Coffee Association, would dictate that cappuccino foam have at least 1 centimeter of foam sitting on top, where if you think about it, that's roughly 2 fingers of foam, or 2 international pinky widths of foam. Latte foam takes that down to 1/2 centimeter, or 1 international pinky width. And then lastly, we have our no foam latte, or flat white, however you want to call it, which is where we really try to incorporate no air. We're just trying to bring the milk up to temperature, right? So the way that we accomplish that is, once again, just by where we start with the steam wand tip, as far as how deep it is. With a no foam beverage, we are going to start with the tip deeper, and we're going to keep it deeper the entire time. We're not gonna bring the tip up towards the surface because we don't want to pull air in. Now latte milk, we're going to start with the tip just under the surface, and then we're going to bring the tip just a little bit higher, so we start pulling in some air. And we're just going to do that and watch the foam grow for about a pinky's width higher. And then the tip goes back down to just mix everything thoroughly. And then once again, for a cappuccino, start with the tip deep, bring it up shallow so that we pull in air. We're going to watch it grow for 2 pinkies. And then we put the tip a little deeper, and we're just trying to keep it mixing until we come up to our final beverage temperature. We're around 145 degrees. So once again, this time we'll go ahead and do cappuccino foam. So I always teach people, wrap the tip of your steam wand, get your fingers nice and high, go out of the path of the steam, and point the steam wand away from yourself. And we're going to purge the steam wand a couple of times to make sure there's no condensed moisture trapped in there. I like to keep the steam wand nice and vertical. I bring the steam wand as far out as it'll go, which is roughly 30 to 40 degrees of angle. Steam wand goes into the pouring spout of the pitcher. We put the steam wand tip underneath the surface, and once again, we are 50% front to back in the pitcher, but we are 25% to the right in the pitcher. That is our starting position, no matter what. We're going to go ahead and start the steam wand. I am then going to bring the tip higher to start adding air. And then the steam wand goes back underneath the surface, and we're just mixing. Lovely. Remembering once again to make sure to keep that steam wand tip underneath the surface of the liquid until the steam wand is fully turned off. We do not want to milk volcano ourselves. Great. Now, as we can see, there are a few dish soap bubbles in there, but we have a pretty good layer of foam there, right? Roughly 2 pinkies widths of foam. We tap and polish until it looks glossy and beautiful and looks like wet latex paint.
Delicious paint.
Right, so hopefully that all made a lot of sense. It's exceedingly simple, just a couple of very basic metrics. Remember, steam wand tip in the pouring spout, 50% front to back, 25% to the right is always the position that you're going to utilize, because that's going to create the best vortex. Last piece of advice is just remember, we want wet latex paint texture. We don't want to see individual discernible bubbles. We're not playing old school, spooning foam off the top, that kind of stuff. Nope. We just want good, sweet, nicely textured milk.